Hi, in this video we'll be checking out how to use artifacts. Now let's first talk about what artifacts are. They are used for fast, long-term persistent storage, and that's basically it. So let's check a few use cases. So first we can use them to collect debug data from our jobs, like logs, screenshots, or videos. Secondly, we can use them to pass data between jobs in a single workflow. And thirdly, we can use them for long-term storage of final deliverables. So what are the types of artifacts that we have? Firstly, we have job artifacts. These are useful for collecting job data. Secondly, we have workflow artifacts. These are useful for passing data between jobs. And thirdly, we have project artifacts. These are ideal for storing the final deliverables of your workflow. Now, let's see how we're gonna set up this. First, we're gonna store logs from a job. This is a job artifact. Secondly, we're gonna pass a build app to other jobs, which is a workflow artifact. Thirdly, we will store the final deliverable, which is going to be a project artifact. And last, we will check out how to set up retention policies. So how long Semaphore is going to store all of the files. Now, let's get started with the first one, and let's first store logs from a job. When we are located on our project page, let's click on Edit Workflow, and we'll pick the Setup minus Semaphore branch. And now we are in the workflow builder. So we want to add a job artifact. So let's click on our tests, and usually we add the job artifact in the epilogue section. So if we zoom in a bit and we click on epilogue, this gets executed after each job. So basically, regarding the job artifact, it's good to just execute it always. You also have the option to execute it only if the job has passed or only if the job has failed. But in this case, we want it to execute always. So what we will do, we will push the logs directory to our artifacts. Now, in order to do this, there's a command called artifact push job. And we're going to enter that one in here. Artifact push job. And the name of the directory is called logs. So this depends on how your project is structured. So when you're doing your build process, if you have a logs directory, you can just push that one in. Or if you want to push specific files, you can push specific files in as well. Now, artifact push job logs is the one that does the job over here. And now what we need to do is just click on run workflow, looks good, and start. And now the workflow will get triggered and our artifacts will get pushed in our jobs. So let's wait for the workflow to finish. And once the workflow is finished, so the unit tests and integration tests part, we can then click on either of these two jobs. Because this is a job artifact, this means that we need to click on these two jobs and check out the artifact. So if we click on unit tests, for instance, and click on the artifacts tab, we can see that there's a new section files that was pushed here. So we have like the logs directory, and here we have this fake log that was pushed in. And this is basically how we set up a job artifact. So we've set up our first job artifact. Now the next step is to actually set up a workflow artifact, which is going to be used to pass the build of our app to other jobs. So let's get started. On our main project page, let's click on Edit Workflow and pick the Setup minus Semaphore branch. And now what we're going to do is to our initial block, so this one, we're going to actually push things into our artifact store. So there's a command called artifact push workflow. This one is used when you want to push some files and store them as an artifact and then reuse them throughout your whole workflow. So in our case, what's going to happen, I have a Node.js app, and when a Node.js app builds, you have a dist directory. And that dist directory can then be pushed into our artifact store, and we can reuse it to perform various tasks in other jobs instead of building the app from scratch. So we can use this command, and when we are in our job, we can then use the epilogue part and execute this artifact push workflow, and we just specify the this directory. Now, in this case, you can put this one into if job has passed, because if the build fails, then we don't necessarily want to push things into our this directory. Okay, and now when things are pushed, in any of the other jobs, we can basically reuse this. We can reuse it by using the artifact pull workflow command. So we can use this command to check out our files. So in our tests block, we can use in the prolog command artifact pull workflow and specify this. And this is going to pull the files from our artifact into our job. And then we can perform various things on it. Now, this is basically it. So this is how you can push things into artifacts and then reuse them. This is a workflow artifact. We can click on run the workflow and then looks good start to save things. And now our workflow is going to get triggered. And once things go through, we're going to check the artifacts tab to see if our files have been stored. So the third tab, artifacts, is the one where you can now view the things. So if we click on artifacts, you can see that this directory is present. So this is the one that we have pushed in. And inside we have our files. And this is basically how a workflow artifact works. Okay, so we have created a workflow artifact, and the next step is to actually use a project artifact to store our final deliverable. So let's do this right now. Let's go into edit workflow mode and pick the setup minus semaphore branch. Now, what we're going to do now is set up a project-based artifact. Now, project-based artifacts are particularly useful for storing the final deliverables of our builds. Now, we're going to add an extra block here, and we're going to name it build store, save artifact, and we're going to add something to our commands. So first, we're going to perform a checkout. And then the command that is used to actually push things into our project artifact storage is called artifact push project. This one. Now I already have a file called semaphore node -001 in my build folder, and I'm just going to use that, but feel free to use any file that you have that is your final build. So if you're using, I don't know, Java project or any other specific technology, just use the final binary that's generated or the final folder to actually store that in your artifact storage. Now you can also perform zip commands before that or tar commands and then just store the final file in your artifact project storage. Now once this is done, you just click run the workflow, looks good start. And now our workflow is going to get triggered and we're just going to wait for it to go through. So first we do our first block and now we're in our test block where we actually store our logs, and now we're in our build store block where we're going to save our final artifact. So once this is done, we can go into projects, pick out our project, and then go into the artifacts tab. So this one. And now you can see that our file is stored over here. Now, as said, this is used to save the final deliverables of your project. Okay, we've successfully set up our project artifact. Now, the next step is to set up our retention policies. So what are retention policies? This basically means when our artifacts get deleted, because we don't want to store all of our artifacts all the time. So maybe some branches have been merged and we want to like delete them afterwards. So this is why we use retention policies to set up how long our artifacts are actually saved. So let's set up some retention policies. So by default, artifacts are stored indefinitely. Now, in order to change that, we need to set up retention policies. To do that, we go into settings and then we go into artifacts. And here we can specify the artifact usage on our project. So the retention policy can be specified on project artifacts, workflow artifacts, and job artifacts. And we can specify different retention policies for all of these. The process of setting up a retention policy is the same for all three. Now we're going to set up a retention policy for our job artifacts. Now let's click on Add Retention Policy, and we need to specify two things. One is the path. The second one is how long files are going to be stored until they are deleted. Now here, what I had was I had a build directory, a this directory, a logs directory, and I'm going to just use the logs directory and specify that after 1 week, these should get deleted. And basically when we save these changes, what's going to happen is all the jobs that are older than 1 week, their artifacts are going to be deleted. And we click on Save Changes to save these. And now our job artifacts have our retention policy. Now we can do that as said for project artifacts, workflow artifacts, and job artifacts. Okay, we've set up our retention policies now. Now let's do a summary of artifacts. So we can use them for debugging. For instance, when we run our tests, if we use a tool like Cypress, it generates screenshots and videos, and we can save these in our artifact storage and check them out if something went wrong during our tests. Now, the other thing is reusability. So when we do our builds, we can reuse these files in our other jobs, in our entire workflow. The last one is analysis. So for instance, if we have a bunch of logs that we store in our artifacts, we can use the after jobs part to basically push these logs into any log analysis tool. Now, these are just some of the use cases that come in handy when we use artifacts. Now, artifacts is a really powerful feature. If you like this video, make sure you click on the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. This was it.